I've now owned my Yamaha Vmax for a number of months, and I've put on a few hundred miles. This is a 1986 Yamaha Vmax, the second year of production of this legendary muscle bike. It's quite a monster. The Yamaha Vmax has a cult-like following when it comes to motorcycles, and some people get it and some people don't. A lot of people didn't find this bike quite attractive, but let me tell you, the more you start learning about it, when you actually ride it, it actually begins to grow on you quite a bit. I was in the group of people who didn't care for how it looks, but then it started to grow on me a lot, and enough to say, you know what, I want a Vmax. I want to know how this bike feels to ride. And let me tell you, it's lived up to a lot of my expectations, but that doesn't mean it's without fault. The very first thing I don't like about the Yamaha Vmax is the finish that Yamaha gave. It's a very of-era thing when it comes to motorcycles of the 80s. Motorcycles of this time didn't have the quite quality control I find that bikes of the 70s and bikes of the 90s did. The 80s was a big time of innovation, as you can see here with a crazy 145 horsepower V4. But when you do look at a lot of the things on the Vmax, you will see a lot of these bikes with a lot of pitting and corroding on the engine, and bikes that are considered to be very nice still have pitting and corrosion issues. Even when you come to the intakes here, a lot of these will always have pitting and corrosion on them. When you come over to all this like raw, exposed, polished aluminum on the front, a lot of it is pitted and corroded. Even when you come down to the rear kind of stay here, a lot of it has a lot of pitting and corrosion, and that's not just something on my bike. My bike is actually a very nice example of a Vmax, but when I was shopping, I would see a lot of these motorcycles with flaking issues, and they're just never in phenomenal shape because of how they treated them in the day. I guess when they came from the factory, they just didn't use enough material there, or simply the motor might produce a little bit more heat from paints we're able to take in the day. I'm not sure what it was, but a lot of these bikes will be a lot worse condition than my bike is in here. I mean, this was a very hard to find motorcycle when it came down to it. When it comes to bikes that are just in decent shape, there's not a lot of them out there. And that's the first thing that I don't like about it, because this bike is really pretty when you get down to the details. Some people find them super ugly, but when you do get down into the details and just see all the machine work that's done on the front here, in the back, or just the minor little kind of things that are done, I just want them to be shiny. And finding one like that isn't possible without spending tons of money, and then you don't want to ride them. The second thing that I don't like about the Yamaha Vmax are the front brakes. Now, my fork seals on my bike are leaking a decent amount, but even with that said, there is not enough braking power for that. Let's just say this motor makes so much power, and the brakes of the 80s that are on this bike are not adequate to host all of that. When I do open the forks up and I change the seals and the fluid inside, I also would like to put some type of performance pads in it, see if that makes a difference, and maybe throw some new rotors on it. I'd like to see how much of a difference that makes and getting some proper feel out of it. The rear, on the other hand, locks up very easily. So if you're riding a Vmax, just be careful not to put too much rear brake pressure, because it will just lock that wheel up and it'll kick it sideways without a problem. The rear braking situation, along with the power and not having a front brake, makes you want to push the rear harder, and I think that's probably got a lot of people in trouble, because that rear brake without the ABS is obviously 80s bike. Well, it'll surprise you how quick it locks up. I've never unintentionally locked up a brake on any motorcycle, except one time when I was riding the Max, and obviously I immediately knew that I was locking it, but it caught me by surprise because I wasn't pressing it that hard. And even though I might have a little bit of fluid getting onto it, I'm trying to keep my brakes as clean as possible. It's not leaking like horribly, but enough to maybe make a difference. Maybe enough to make it unsafe-ish. But I am told by other Vmax owners that they have the same thing, that a lot of people doing like R1 front ends on these bikes, R1 brakes, all that kind of stuff. I want to keep my bike original, and if I can just change pads and make it adequate, I think that'd be good for me, but I do wish that there was a lot more power there. Now, the third thing I hate or dislike about this bike is the fact that it's very complex, and that's not necessarily a dig at the Vmax, and that's not necessarily like to say that it's too much or it doesn't need to have all this stuff. Modern equipment, modern horsepower, modern day things have come such a long way when it comes down to the Vmax. And honestly, bikes of the 80s, they tend to be way more complex with a lot of things to break, and that's just the innovation that happened. In the 60s, motorcycles were, I mean, let's face it, there were twins and small motorcycles, and the bigger bikes were some of the British bikes like the 750s and maybe 850s on some of the bikes, but they were twins. They were air-cooled twins. And when it came down to motorcycles into the 70s, they came with inline 4-cylinders, like CB750 was the first to pave its way, single-sided disc brake in the front, perhaps a drum in the rear, and that's kind of as complex as it really got for a while there. In my opinion, one of the first bikes to really pave the way for motorcycles like this was the GL1000 with the rack of carburetors. And if you know anything about these rack carburetor setups that live in the valley or on top of the engine, they are kind of annoying to tune and clean and keep running. When it comes to carburetors, a lot of people give them a bad name, but when it comes to carbs like these where you have to take a lot apart in order to get to them, a lot of vacuum tubes running everywhere, I mean, they do get a little finicky. And as that 70s design keeps evolving, a lot more vacuum tubes started going everywhere. The liquid cooling got a little bit more complex. There's a shaft in this bike, and just overall, there's a lot going on. And now we're introducing things like V-Boost, controlled by an ECU, a computerized thing that sets the motorcycle's valves in the carburetors to open up and to give it full power at 6,000 RPM, and all of those things that are really cool when they work. But there's a level of complexity that goes down to it when they're not quite as reliable as an early 2000s computer system or a modern computer system or even a 90s computer system. When it comes down to it, the 80s had a lot of complexity and a lot of issues with that complexity because the innovation was there, but the materials, reliability, and longevity, in my opinion, hadn't been found. With the Vmax, it's really not the end of the world, but I have heard of kind of situations where the V-Boost doesn't kick on, things are getting annoying. As far as I'm aware, the V-Boost kicks hard on this bike. But that is something that I don't necessarily love about this bike and bikes of the era, that sometimes they just can't be fixed, and sometimes that they are just really annoying to fix. And I'm sure in my Vmax ownership, if I keep this bike for a number of years, 10 years, you will eventually find some of those things that go wrong with it. And that's just life with a motorcycle like this. When it comes down to 70s bikes, you don't really have a lot of those problems, and when you do find the 90s bikes, there's usually a simple or simpler solution in many cases. I find the late 90s bikes to be absolutely phenomenal machines and some of the best that's ever come out. But again, that was because of the innovation of this time period here. Now, these next two are probably going to be a little bit smaller. Those three are the main things that I dislike about the Vmax, and that last thing about it being complex, that's something I have to live with, and I knew that before buying the machine, and clearly I'm okay with that as I own the bike. But it is something to mention that you might spend some extra money on servicing the bike compared to something that was a little bit earlier or a little bit later. But one thing that I don't necessarily love about the bike is swinging my leg over it. It's a small thing, but you don't really see this gauge at all. So the RPMs, you gotta kind of like look down. When you're riding the bike, all you kind of see is your speedometer. And if you're wearing a helmet, when you're wearing a helmet on this motorcycle, if you are riding and just cruising around and you want to crack the throttle open, you don't really see the revs. You have to look down to look at it, which isn't the end of the world, but I feel like if the revs were here and the speedo was there, I would like that balance a little bit better, or if they somehow incorporate it into the same thing. Obviously, screens didn't exist. I know the Rocket 3, the new one, has like a circle gauge in the middle, which is really cool. I don't recall. I think the newer Vmax, the second gen bike, also does the same thing with a screen there. Again, it's not something I really hate, but it's a smaller thing to mention with this motorcycle, because I gotta get to 5 things, and that is one of the things that I don't necessarily love about it. And the final thing I'll kind of mention is the gearbox. If you don't know, these gearboxes are a little bit clunky, and they did have problems in their day. A big problem with the Vmax, I think the biggest problem with the Vmax is a second gear issue, where if the bike was beaten a lot, I think is the case of this, eventually the second gear grinds down when you're slamming it from first to second and second to third. I think more so when you're going from first to second and you're absolutely beating this thing, there's too much engine for that second gear, and there's a kind of a notch in the second gear internally that wears down and grinds down, and when that's gone, you will not have a second gear, or your bike will start popping out of second gear. And it is a fixable issue, but again, the whole engine has to come apart. You have to split your cases, take the transmission out, and there are solutions, and people do make billet gears that should never fail, or will have a way less likelihood of failing, or a much longer life than the factory one did. Speaking on the gearbox, aside from that, it is a little bit clunky. I mean, I do find the gears to kind of like clunk into gear a little bit as a shaft-driven bike, so it's not the most desired thing in the world. It's not really like big enough to say I hate the gearbox or anything like that, but it is something to mention that they did have issues, and sometimes, you know, you're kind of clicking through gears and you do get a little bit of like and a feel, you know. It's kind of gives you a little like, huh, that wasn't like I love that shift. I guess that's just comparing it to some of modern bikes. I mean, even like bikes like CB750s and stuff like that, they have like weird kind of clunky gearboxes sometimes, or they might not just feel very adequate. The bike has 30,000 miles on it, so I'm sure it's a little worn in as well. But I did want to mention it because that issue in the Vmax, the biggest issue when buying the bike is to look for that second gear thing. So it is something that I guess I don't necessarily love about the bike, the fact that you gotta split a case to fix one of its bigger issues. So, you know, it's not the end of the world. I guess you can skip second gear. This thing will do a burnout through first, second, and partially into third gear. If you have a worn out tire, I'm sure that you crack V-boost in third gear in the right RPM, in the right place and time, it will burn the rear tire. But that's all I have for the video. If you guys did enjoy, just a couple of informational things, some of the things I don't like about it, some of the ownership experiences so far on the motorcycle. I will be doing a proper review with this bike, so if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that video. And also, if you've made it this far into the video, I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek into something I've been working on. This hoodie, Vintage Racing Club, the company that I own. If you guys are interested, we have house tees live on the website right now, but hoodies are coming extremely soon, and well, they will be fairly limited, so keep your eyes out for when we drop them.